Well, it's official. You might argue that the NFL doesn't like the 49ers a whole lot after this latest news. San Francisco is headed back to Mexico City. They will become the first team in NFL history to take two separate international road trips in a single season. Obviously, Australia, Melbourne, we talked about that a couple weeks ago. Now back to Estadio Azteca in Mexico City. The game will likely be in December, although that has not yet been finalized. It's going to be in the renovated Estadio Azteca, which is now has a corporate name. So I'm just going to call it what it used to be called, just like Candlestick Park. I never called it 3Com Park. This is what the renderings look like. They're finishing up the stadium as we speak. It's going to host the World Cup this summer. Iconic spot where the 49ers have already played twice, but I think that the lead here is that the 49ers are going to fly nearly 40,000 miles in 2026. Last season, the Chargers went to Brazil, and that was part of an NFL record 37,086 miles. The 49ers, just with the game schedule, are set for over 38,000 miles. But keep in mind that Mexico City is at over 7,300 feet in elevation, which is high altitude. 7,300 feet in California right now is getting snowed out up in the mountains. You've seen all those videos from Donner Pass and from the Sierra Nevada with this massive, massive winter storm. Anyway, this is at altitude, oxygen thinner, and the 49ers, the last time they went to Mexico City in 2022, they practiced in Colorado Springs before that at the Air Force Academy, because that's also up at altitude, and that helped them acclimate. So if the 49ers decide to do the same thing and acclimate in Colorado, that will add even more travel, because it'd be kind of a triangle, right, that they take through Denver and then down to Mexico City. And that could get them at about 39,000 miles, which, again, that would be NFL history. It already is set to be NFL history, even without a swing through Colorado Springs. So the opponent's going to be determined and revealed when the NFL schedule comes out in a little bit less than 3 months. But the 49ers are headed to this iconic stadium in Mexico City. And earlier in the year, they're going to head to an even bigger stadium. This is the Melbourne Cricket Ground in Australia. This could fit about 100,000 people. Now, Estadio Azteca is also very, very big. Not quite at that capacity of over 100,000 anymore. But it has in the past held, I think, 119,000 for a soccer match, I should say. When the 49ers played the Cardinals there, it was filled to the brim at a new capacity. They had about 80,000 fans in the building. The 49ers also take two East Coast trips, like cross-country East Coast trips in 2026, to play the Falcons in Atlanta and to play the Giants in New Jersey, although we don't stay in New Jersey. We'll stay in New York City when we head out in that direction. That was a fun trip this past season. For all this travel, Brandon Aiyuk is going to be further and further in the rearview mirror. 30,000 miles in the rearview mirror, just the way that the 49ers want it. We'll see what they decide to do with him contractually. They could theoretically just hold him hostage, just kind of like he held them hostage, and keep him on the team because they're not paying him right now since he's away from the facility. They could force Brandon Aiyuk to actually do something like report to force some movement here. Because if he does report, then the 49ers would be on the hook for his $25 million option bonus, which they obviously would have no plans of paying. So at that point, they would, and that doesn't trigger until week 1 of the season. So that would force the 49ers to at least make a decision here. They could just be done with it and cut him with a post-June 1st designation or after June 1st this year. But I think it might incentivize the 49ers might be incentivized to actually make Brandon Aiyuk take the first step here, because as long as he's on the left squad list and you're not paying him, you're keeping his salary cap prorations alive, which is what you want as the 49ers. You're stiff-arming his salary cap hits into the future. The second that you cut or trade him, the second that contract with the 49ers is terminated, that money has to accelerate to the now, and that's obviously not as advantageous for the 49ers, who like to surf that salary cap wave. Anyway, I broke down the 49ers receiver room, which I think is, this is the state of the 49ers series. This is part one. I do this every year. I do an 8-part series covering the entire 49ers team. And I always have to decide, where do I start? What position group do we begin with? And this year I said, the defense was so injured in 2025, even though they technically were the worst performer, at least the worst performing unit on this team. I think that the unit that needs to be actively fixed, like the position group that the 49ers need to target a lot of their fire on this offseason, is wide receiver, because that, quite honestly, is where Brandon Aiyuk absolutely screwed them in 2025. You won't be shocked, but you might throw up in your mouth when you see this. So the 49ers receiving efficiency from this past season. Those of you who are familiar with the data that I visualize on this channel know that red is bad and below average, and blue is good. There obviously isn't a whole lot of blue here. Yards per route run. This is going to be probably your best way to measure how efficient a receiver, or a target in this case, because we have running backs and tight ends, is within the context of an offense. So just take a look at that. As you can see, George Kittle is the only 49ers player who scored above 2 yards per route run, who scored above the league average. Now, Christian McCaffrey had a monstrous season when it came to volume, 102 receptions, 924 yards. But obviously, defenses were able to keep the lid on the 49ers' pass game explosiveness. And I don't think it was the fault of Christian McCaffrey. It was the fault of the lack of separation that the 49ers were able to get downfield. They just did not have the firepower to create space. They didn't have space makers. They were counting on Brandon Aiyuk the second that they gave him a contract worth up to $120 million in 2024. When Aiyuk got hurt, the injury guarantees all triggered. So the 49ers were on the hook for those, and there was no way they were going to be able to cut ties with him. The best path forward for the 49ers was to hope for a solid Brandon Aiyuk recovery, get him back at some point in 2025, and move forward. They did draft Ricky Pearsall, which was very needed for San Francisco, and he did play really well over the course of the first month of the 2025 season, but then he hurt his PCL, and he was never able to run full speed again. So if you look at Pearsall on here, 1.68 yards per route run, a little bit below average, like better than some of these other targets, so not as deep of a shade of red. But Pearsall was at 2.2 or 2.3. He would have been well above average over the course of the first 4 weeks. The 49ers' margin for error in 2025 was Brandon Aiyuk. If Pearsall were to get hurt, which he did, if anything else here slipped, which it did, I mean, Juwan Jennings also broke 5 ribs, and I think that compromised his effectiveness. And I just don't think that Juwan is a number one. I think that we can all agree that he's best suited for a role where he's the 2 or a very, very good number 3. But as soon as, stuff didn't go perfectly for the 49ers receiver room from a health perspective, they badly needed the return of Brandon Aiyuk. And then Brandon Aiyuk walked out on the football team, and they hadn't been able to sign anybody of needle-moving significance because of the money that they had committed to him. So that's why I say in the headline here that Brandon Aiyuk devastated the 49ers. The good news for San Francisco, the silver lining coming out of this 2025 season, is that they were successfully able to void Brandon Aiyuk's $27 million in 2026 guarantees, which means that he's been paid for 2024 and 2025. They could probably even recoup some of the 2025 money since he walked out on the team toward the end of that season. But they no longer are held hostage by 27 million or whatever it was here in 2026, which is huge because they could spend that money elsewhere. There's actually wiggle room, swimming room for the 49ers to begin making up for this loss of Brandon Aiyuk. And, you know, just take a look at this right here. I think I left the microwave open and the door's beeping. So what I'm going to give you guys is a look at the 49ers' poor explosive play rates, and I will be right back. All right, made it back. It was actually the oven. Somebody's, I think it's my dad here in Visalia, is reheating a pie or something, and it started beeping. So we have to get his attention. But you saw this, and you see that the 49ers are in a spot that you don't want to be in. In previous seasons, they'd been in the upper right quadrant. This is, by the way, you should probably want to see the bottom, explosive rush rate on the x-axis. So the further to the right, the higher percentage of plays are explosive runs. That means runs of 10 or more yards. And the higher up you are on the y-axis means the higher percentage of explosive passes. It's really, really important to deliver explosive plays in this league. There's data that shows that teams that go on a 15-play drive without a single explosive play don't score very often. Like something's gonna go wrong over the course of that time. But if you can filter in at least one explosive play into some of these marches, then your scoring rate goes up from like 16% to something like 76%. It is massive. It's a league of opportunism now defensively. So you're going to see a lot of NFL defenses try to bend but not break. The 49ers did that last year with offenses, I think, generally ahead of defenses in many ways. And so then they're just going to try to prey on certain plays to grab a takeaway. And if you don't deliver enough explosive plays, you're going to give defenses way too many opportunities to pounce on either an interceptable pass, strip a football, or just turn you over on downs because they see a weakness that they can exploit with a blitz and put you into a bad down and distance situation. So the 49ers had to play the absolute hard way this past year because their lack of explosiveness, and it really originated in the lack of space. If you watch the game against Seattle, nobody was open. Like very consistently, everybody would be blanketed. Purdy would have no chance. Rinse and repeat. This carried over to the run game. If you don't have any downfield threat, then the defense is going to be able to crowd the box. And it all traced back to the 49ers' loss of Brandon Aiyuk. This is somebody who was a fantastic separator for the team. And by the way, the separation stats for San Francisco, also not pretty. You could see where they were. They ranked number 28 if you included the postseason this year. But this is somebody who was a really good separator that would have helped this very important stat. but also somebody who was a really good run blocker. And running the football, especially in Kyle Shanahan's system, when you're calling outside zone plays and the receivers on the perimeter have to block, running is very tied to receiving success. If you're able to establish a good rushing threat, especially with the outside zone to the perimeter, it will open up the seams passing-wise. But the 49ers couldn't run either, and a lot of that, I think most of it, was because they were unable to block the way that they used to on the outside. They averaged only 3.8 yards per carry this season, which was the worst average of the entire Kyle Shanahan era. So what you had in 2025 was Brock Purdy playing Superman, and he did it consistently enough, especially when he was healthy. And I think that Mac Jones operated the offense at a high level, just given his physical limitations and given the explosiveness limitations of his weapons. He was able to keep the 49ers afloat. But the 49ers played like top 3 offense down the stretch of the season when Brock Purdy returned, despite the fact that this was the type of separation that they were working with. Despite the fact that it was really, really hard to run the football to the outside. Despite the fact that, remember the game against the Bears where Purdy just went off? He didn't have George Kittle in that game. That was one of the very few games where they could run without George Kittle. And I think it took a superhuman performance from the quarterback for the 49ers to be able to do that. But Kittle missed about half the season. The 49ers rush efficiency rankings when Kittle was on injured reserve, number 27. Their rushing efficiency rankings when he wasn't on injured reserve was number 7. So they improved 20 spots when Kittle was available. And what that tells me is they are way too dependent on George Kittle's perimeter blocking abilities to unlock the run game. If their receivers were better blockers, then they wouldn't have a 20-spot difference when Kittle was available versus when he wasn't. And you go back to 2023, and you could go back to 19 structure fool. That was the play that they called against the Pittsburgh Steelers to open up the second half. Christian McCaffrey scored on a 65-yard touchdown. And the key blocker on the play was Brandon Aiyuk, a receiver. Another key blocker on the play was Ray McLeod, a receiver coming over from the other side. The 49ers just did not get that from their wideouts this year, and the origination of the problem traces back to Aiyuk. Yes, they wish they would have traded him to the Steelers at this point. That much is obvious, but they didn't. We know why. They were desperate to run it back in 2024. Anyway, the whole piece up here on the San Francisco Standard is about how the 49ers can now move forward. I personally look at this in very economic terms, supply and demand. I look at markets. The wide receiver free agent market seems awfully sparse to me. Yes, Alec Pierce would I think fit well, but he may be the top guy in the whole thing. Is he going to command close to $30 million a year? If yes, I don't know if that is an efficient signing for the 49ers. Juwan Jennings is projected to make $22 or $23 million a year. That gives you an idea of where the free agent receiver market might go. I think that the receiver draft market is extremely deep. And obviously, the draft, by definition, is where contractual value is likely going to be most easy to find because those are cost-controlled contracts. You're not going to have to think about paying a guy $30 million annually, and he could very well be just as talented as some of those free agents, or even more talented as some of the free agents who are going to command that much money. So receiver free agent class, thin. Receiver draft class, deep. Tight end free agent class, deep. This is important. I think this is a really, really key variable here because the 49ers are also dealing with the George Kittle Achilles tear. He might be back for week 1. He could defy the timeline odds and be back for week 1, even though he suffered this injury in the postseason, already in this calendar year of 2026. He could not be back for week 1. Either way, though, I think that you really stand to benefit in a economically efficient way. And I think with a salary cap, you have to be cost efficient in this league by sprucing up tight end in a way that you really haven't spruced it up before. You'll probably get Jake Tonjes back if you're the 49ers. He's a restricted free agent. So it shouldn't take too much to be able to re-sign him. And I think the 49ers will do that. But what about adding another like true starting caliber tight end through free agency, somebody who's ready-made in a year where Kyle Pitts might be available? We'll see if the Atlanta Falcons franchise tag him. In a year where David Njoku, the Cleveland Brown, might be available. Dallas Goedert, an older player set to hit free agency. Hell, if you think Kittle will be back week 1 and you just want like a nice veteran addition, Austin Hooper, Zach Ertz, to the Stanford guys. If Ertz and Hooper continue to play, I mean, they could retire this offseason. But if they're in on playing next year, Hooper has played under Kyle Shanahan earlier in his career with the Atlanta Falcons, and you could give yourself an upgrade if you're San Francisco. Now, some of these tight ends are going to be better at blocking. Some of them are going to be better at receiving. But the whole point of the tight end position is that these guys can do both. And I think when you need to improve both the perimeter blocking and your separation game, probably the most efficient way to do it is through that tight end position, because those guys are designed to do both. They're at the intersection of both. Brian Fleury just got hired to be the Seattle Seahawks offensive coordinator, tight ends coach. Ben Johnson, offensive mastermind, coach of the Chicago Bears, came up as a tight ends coach. You are at the intersection of everything that the offense does at tight end. So, if coaches are looked at to have great offensive acumen if they coach the tight end position well, because of everything that they have to teach at that one spot, because of how adaptable it is, then I think that you can make the argument that adding a ready-made veteran at that position can go a long way toward helping your offense. Now, that's not to say that the 49ers can't add a tight end and also sign a receiver. And there are guys that I think could really help this team. I look at, the guy that I've talked about the most is Romeo Doubs. A lot of people don't like that he wears it looks like Yoshi, with his what is it? The Guardian cap. It looks like a big mushroom, but I know a lot of people don't like the aesthetic for Romeo Doubs, but he can block and he's fast, and I think he's one of the more underrated wideouts actually in the game. He's scheduled for unrestricted free agency. Somebody like Wan'Dale Robinson is going to be a free agent, and I think that because he's a smaller guy, smaller in stature, maybe he doesn't get caught up in a crazy price escalation like Juwan Jennings might. Like Jennings at 22 or 23 million. I mean, I'm sorry, but the 49ers weren't willing to go to 20 last offseason. So I don't know why they'd be willing to go to 20 million after Jennings came off of a worse year this year. Mike Evans might be a free agent, and maybe somebody at the tail end of his career who's obviously still a really good player would be willing to come aboard for a cheaper deal, a one-year deal that could help bolster the room. But it's the draft class that's really, really deep here. So unless you could truly find second-tier receiver value, and I think they found some value with Demarcus Robinson last year, and he showed up in that playoff game against Philadelphia. And so you probably make a signing like that if you could find a guy like I just mentioned or somebody comparable at a good cost. You make that work. But the draft is, I think, where you could really, really make your hay. And I know that I keep on talking about Casey Concepcion of Texas A&M, Mekhi Lemon out of USC, another receiver who probably fits what the 49ers are looking for. You find a way, I think, to add a more premier piece in that regard, and I think you use a fairly high draft pick at wide receiver. I think it's that important. I think it was that big of a weakness to the 49ers. And then you fill in the rest with who you could sign, and also obviously your development. I mean, it always comes back to the draft, right? And they've got Jordan Watkins and Jacob Cowing in, I think, decent position to take next steps this year. I wrote about everything up here on the Standard, obviously tying it back to the Aiyuk saga and next steps, and then obviously the 49ers strategy moving forward. So go ahead and check this out. Mike put the link into the description, so you can go and see it right now. Mike just, I don't know if I just saw this, Mike. It's funny. We think the same way. He sent this a couple minutes ago. Do the 49ers replace Jennings with Mike Evans and go after a speedy wide receiver in the draft? That's exactly what I think the 49ers do. Maybe not, specifically Mike Evans, but I think that the strategy of, get a proven, reliable veteran, even if he's a little long in the tooth, at a decent cost, if that's possible, and then get your speed, and you need more team speed, go ahead and try to load up on that through the draft, because speed and youth are obviously very, very correlated. This State of the 49ers series, like I said, it's an 8-part series. This is one of 8. You guys can request which one I do next. I already have some ideas. I'm going to be on a longer flight today, so I'll be working on it then, and you'll have another one to read maybe as soon as tomorrow. But we're going to go through every single position and figure out how the 49ers can best get this done. Currently at receiver, obviously they're hinging a lot, and they should hinge a lot, on Pearsall. I mean, he's a first-round pick. He was playing at the level that they needed him to play at. I think that's the most important thing to emphasize over the course of the first 4 weeks, and then he got hurt. And people's analysis of Ricky Pearsall is wildly irrational. The guy got shot in the chest before he started his rookie season, and he still finished it strong. So I think he's pretty damn tough, if you ask me from that regard. But it was the year 2 PCL that has really been the one injury that's lingered with him over the course of several months, and people are making it sound like this is something that's lingered with him over the course of his entire career, when he actually got shot in the chest his first year. That had nothing to do with a PCL injury. The 49ers, not by their own choice, they paid Brandon Aiyuk in 2024 and drafted Ricky Pearsall in that same season, thinking that Aiyuk was going to be with this team long-term, thinking that would give Pearsall runway. Obviously, that runway for Pearsall significantly shortened. The 49ers paid for it in 2025 when Brandon Aiyuk was unavailable. But moving forward here into 2026, it is Ricky Pearsall's time to shine at that wide receiver position. You augment the room as well as you can, but he remains a pivot point for the 49ers at wide receiver. All right. NFL record amount of travel. Nearly 40,000 miles will be flown by the 49ers in 2026 to Australia. There's the Melbourne Cricket Ground. That place there's already a line for tickets, by the way. They're going to fill that up, 100,000. And then Mexico City, we'll get a preview of the new stadium there. Maybe the Wi-Fi will actually work this time. It didn't work last time. I heard that they completely redid it. So that's good. That will likely be in December. We will learn the 49ers' opponent in Mexico City at a later date. And we'll also learn if they fly to Colorado Springs before heading down to Mexico City at a later date. But they become the first team to take 2 separate international trips. The Vikings last year played in 2 different countries, but it was the same trip. They went to Dublin, Ireland, and then they went to London. Those 2, it's a short flight apart, and that was back-to-back weeks. For the 49ers, this won't be back-to-back weeks, and it won't be the same trip. One will be a 16-hour flight to Melbourne, Australia in week 1, and the other will probably be toward the end of the season in December down to Mexico City. Where I will say that the 49ers they won't technically have a home game. They're going to technically lose a home game with this. But they had a hell of a home field crowd advantage back in 2022 when they beat the Cardinals at this stadium. Like I said, 80,000 people in that stadium. And I would say 95% for the 49ers. Those overhangs, they're like Seattle's overhangs. They reverberate the sound back down. So that was one of the loudest pro 49ers crowds I had ever heard. All right, guys, time for me to go. Thanks for watching. Check out the big State of the 49ers wide receiver piece.